the House takes the next step forward so that the public can see the facts for themselves.
It is a sad day. It really is for this country. What the Democrats have put our nation through.
They gave us absolutely no rights. I didn't have one negative Republican vote.
There's a pretty consistent narrative here about what took place.
I did sit in the hearing, and Tim Morrison absolutely did not say that there was quid pro quo.
He confirms Ambassador Taylor's version of the events. That's extremely damning for the president.
This is New Day with Allison Camerata and John Berman.
Oh my gosh, look at that beautiful sunrise there over the Manhattan city skyscraper. Welcome to our viewers in the United States and around the world. This is New Day. It is Friday, November 1st, 6 o'clock here in New York. John Berman is off. John Avlon joins me. Thank you for being here.
Good morning on a big day.
Great to have you.
Post-Halloween.
Thank you very much. I'm still in a candy coma. We begin with President Trump's response to that historic vote in the House to take the impeachment inquiry public. In a new interview, the president signals he will not cooperate with the impeachment proceedings, probably not a surprise. And he now says his conversation with Ukraine's president was, quote, a good call, and even says he might read that transcript to the American people in a televised fireside chat. The president also expressed satisfaction with the testimony of his former top advisor on Russia, Tim Morrison, who backed up the notion of a quid pro quo. However, he did not think there was anything illegal about the Trump-Ukraine call.
Meanwhile, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi also speaking out in a new interview and defending the investigation, saying that President Trump's alleged wrongdoing is something Democrats cannot ignore. House Intelligence Chairman Adam Schiff says they plan to make transcripts of the closed-door depositions public as early as next week. Well, House Dems have a full witness list for next week, although it's unclear who's actually going to show up, especially since the court case that will decide if subpoenaed White House officials are required to appear is not expected to be resolved until after the public hearings in November. So let's begin our coverage with CNN's Suzanne Malveaux live on Capitol Hill. Suzanne, what's the latest?
Well, John, it was just moments after the House voted to move the impeachment inquiry into the public domain that I asked the chairs of those committees whether or not they're ready to announce who they want as witnesses and just how soon. They said they are not yet ready to do that. But President Trump making it very clear that he is fighting this process all the way, starting with wooing and unifying Senate Republicans.
The yeas are 232. The nays are 196.
With the strike of her gavel, Speaker Nancy Pelosi and House Democrats' impeachment inquiry moving into its next phase.
What are we fighting for? Defending our democracy for the people.
Moving the impeachment investigation to public hearings for the American people to see. Democrats expressing concerns as they move forward.
We take no joy in having to move down this road and proceed with the impeachment inquiry, but neither do we shrink from it.
He's not worth impeaching because it's even going to divide the country further than he has already divided it. But this was something that you could not ignore.
A defiant President Trump signaling he will not cooperate with the inquiry, telling the Washington Examiner he wants to do a fireside chat on live television where he will read the transcript of the call, adding, everybody knows I did nothing wrong.
I think this is just more, stunt and showmanship from the president at a time that I think he and my Republican colleagues in Congress need to get serious about what's at stake.
The vote happening at the same time investigators were questioning Tim Morrison for more than 8 hours behind closed doors. President Trump's former top advisor on Russia, telling lawmakers he was told Trump wanted a top Ukrainian official to publicly announce investigations that would stand to benefit the president politically before he would unfreeze nearly $400 million in military aid. Morrison corroborating key elements of Ambassador Bill Taylor's testimony. Morrison, who listened in on Trump's July 25th phone call, said, I want to be clear. I was not concerned that anything illegal was discussed. Still, he did have concerns, such as a potential leak and how it would play out in Washington's polarized environment. The White House claiming Morrison's testimony as a victory for President Trump, according to a senior official. House Republicans echoing that statement.
Mr. Morrison's testimony is very damaging to the Democrat narrative.
Tim Morrison absolutely did not say that there was quid pro quo.
But House Democrats seeing Morrison's deposition differently.
It's hard to see how they interpret it that way. He really confirmed the facts of what has been testified to by people like Ambassador Taylor.
While most lawmakers are out of Washington, they're going back to their home states for a week-long recess to explain to the constituents what was behind their votes. It is going to be a very busy week for the impeachment inquiry. The hope is that the former National Security Advisor John Bolton will testify on Thursday. That, of course, depends on a court ruling in the federal court, whether or not it rules that the White House does and has the authority to block former White House officials from testifying. John?
Thank you, Suzanne. Meanwhile, President Trump insists in a new interview that the impeachment investigation will backfire on Democrats. So what are the risks as the inquiry moves to a new public phase? We're going to discuss that and more next.
In a new interview, President Trump insists that the impeachment investigation will backfire on Democrats. The investigation is now entering a new public phase after lawmakers voted largely along party lines to authorize the inquiry, though 2 Democrats joined Republicans in opposing the probe. Joining us now to talk about it, we have CNN senior global affairs analyst Bianca Golodryga and Rachel Bade, congressional reporter for The Washington Post. Great to have you guys here in studio. Okay, so let's talk about this Washington Examiner interview that President Trump gave after the vote so that we can sense how he's responding to this historic vote. He says that it was a good call. He continues to say, he didn't say a perfect call yesterday.
They've downgraded it from perfect
to good. He said it was a good call with President Zelensky. He stands by that. And he says that he wants to bring it to life for the American people. Here's his plan. At some point, I'm going to sit down, perhaps as a fireside chat on live television, and I will read the transcript of the call because people have to hear it. Okay. That would be awesome. Number one, I like a good dramatic reading.
Dramatic reading as much as the
but
next
I don't know if he would play both parts, Rachel, or just one part.
Ooh,
and I also don't know.
That's an audition opportunity.
Here's another opportunity for Saturday Night Live this weekend.
Oh,
yeah,
please.
They're going to go
if
crazy
you're listening.
with this one. No, I mean, what planet is he living on that he thinks reading this transcript for the American people is going to help him in any way? There are a lot of Republicans who say the transcript is bad, and sure, they're saying it's not impeachable, but if he thinks this is a good defense, somebody needs to get to him and say, we need to have a chat here. There's another takeaway I had from this Washington Examiner story, and that is he says he's not going to cooperate with the House investigation, even though they had this vote. I mean, for weeks, the White House and Republicans were just pummeling Pelosi and the Democrats saying, this is a fraud, this is not a real impeachment, they got to have a vote. They had the vote. He's still not going to cooperate, and he has this plan to read this transcript, and he's also saying this Trump appointee who testified yesterday that there was a quid pro quo is going to be his star witness. I mean,
and we will get to that.
If that's their defense, they're really in trouble.
That's where the bar is so low that just because Tim Morrison said he didn't think anything illegal happened, it gives the president time to say this is a great day and thank you, Tim Morrison, for clearing my name. In fact, you do know that he said, yes, he corroborated that there was, in fact, a quid pro quo in his opinion and that it could do damage to U.S. foreign policy, in particular regarding national security and Ukraine. But are we going to hear the president talk about the transcript and read it the way he sent it out or with the ellipses? I mean, which version are we going to hear from the president?
Yeah, do you get the remix? Do you get the unedited,
Exactly.
uncut? So the other key point about this is, look, 4th time in American history that a president's brought up in impeachment charges. The last 2 times, Richard Nixon, Bill Clinton, there were bipartisan margins. Not so yesterday. And this is a political problem as well as potentially a practical problem. Let's take a listen to Nancy Pelosi address the fact that in the past she said she wanted a bipartisan vote before going forward.
Back in March, you said you would go forward if it was bipartisan.
No, I'd
Kevin
hope.
McCarthy said, what's changed about that?
No, I didn't say I would go for if it's bipartisan. I said I would hope that it would be bipartisan. But if they're not going to honor their oath of office to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States, I cannot be held up by that, whether it's in the House or in the Senate.
All right, Rachel, you've done some amazing reporting on it. Here's the big question. There are 18 Republicans who are retiring rather than run again for their House seats coming up. None of them moved over despite some of them being critics of Donald Trump.
Right.
What does that say about the path going forward?
I mean, it doesn't bode well for Democrats in terms of peeling off Republicans for this big impeachment vote that they're going to have in a couple of weeks. I mean, just think about it. As they were out there voting on the floor, Morrison was testifying that the quid pro quo, and yes, he didn't use that phrase, was real, and that military aid was withheld specifically for an investigative purpose. I mean, if Republicans are seeing these headlines right now, and they're still willing to vote against an impeachment inquiry vote. Just imagine how much pressure they're going to be under from the president not to break on an impeachment vote. On that clip that you just played on Pelosi, she did say it needed to be bipartisan, and she also said she needed a majority of voter support to move forward with impeachment. She didn't have either of those, but she was really felt like this is something that was different, and she had no choice but to move forward. And the polls are showing it's paying off right now, and that the polls are moving in her direction. But I mean, clearly, she
yes
didn't
and
have
no.
that.
I mean, the national polls are moving in her direction, but as we've seen, the battleground state polls are not. They are opposed to the impeachment inquiry. And just to fact check her, I mean, just to prove your point in the Washington Post, here is exactly what she said in March. This is what Nancy Pelosi said. Impeachment is so divisive to the country that unless there's something so compelling and overwhelming and bipartisan, I don't think we should go down that path because it divides the country, and he's just not worth it. And so, I mean, it's not bipartisan.
No, but look at the date. That was prior to knowing anything we now know about Ukraine, right? This was just something that we've been learning about the past 2 months. This has been happening behind closed doors, and I agree with you that we haven't seen any Republicans change their view thus far, but these have been closed-door hearings. What happens when we start to hear these witnesses come out for public testimony? If the American public, if their constituents, I know that they're now under the pressure of the president, if they're starting to be under pressure from their constituents, which we haven't quite seen yet, but if we have public hearings, that may change.
Ladies, thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Democrats have been negotiating for former National Security Advisor John Bolton's testimony, but that might not happen. We'll explain why next.
Sunday night, the impeachment inquiry, the witnesses, the testimony, the latest evidence.
The impeachment inquiry is about to enter a new, more public phase.
The White House in crisis, the impeachment inquiry, a CNN special hosted by Anderson Cooper, Sunday night.
Impeachment investigators have a busy week lined up next week with at least 8 hearings on the books, including one with former National Security Advisor John Bolton. But it's unlikely that Bolton will show up, especially since the court cases that will decide if subpoenaed White House officials are required to appear isn't expected to be resolved for at least another month. Joining us now to discuss that and more, CNN legal analyst Ellie Honig was in the courtroom during the hearings yesterday.
That's helpful.
I like the first-person experience there, in addition with Bianca Golderiga joining us again. All right, Ellie, let's start. You were there where it happened in the courtroom, 2 dueling hearings. One regarding Don McGahn, the other regarding Kupperman, which has an impact because he was Bolton's deputy. They set the next hearing date for December 10th. And you say this is the courts at warp speed. That's probably too late to impact impeachment. Is this really the fastest courts can go when impeachment's at stake?
It was a sobering reality check that I'm used to from practicing in the federal courts, that even when the courts are pushing at max speed, it may not be fast enough for impeachment because of the short schedule we're on here. There was a moment when the judge was setting the briefing schedule in the Kupperman case, having already gone out of his way to say, this is of utmost national importance. We have to push here as fast as we can. And one of the lawyers said, Judge, one of the deadlines that you gave us for briefing is really close to Thanksgiving. Can we have a couple extra days? And the judge said, in a matter of this consequence, you need to roll up your sleeves and get the job done. And with all that, we're going back in December 10th.
And by the way, it's November 1st, people.
Yes.
But was the judge inclined to force Kupperman and Bolton to go and testify to congressional investigators or not?
That judge didn't give. That judge kept a pretty good poker face. The judge in the Kupperman case. Now, the 2 cases were related. One was in courtroom 17, one was in courtroom 18, and the judges kept cross-referencing each other. In fact, some of the lawyers who started off in the McGahn hearing when 4 o'clock came for a Kupperman hearing left and walked down the hall and did the Kupperman hearing. Now, the McGahn judge, I think, clearly showed an inclination that she was going to order McGahn to testify. I think she was very skeptical of this absolute immunity argument that the DOJ was raising. She essentially said, how can you take this position, given our constitutional checks and balances, that Congress has just no ability to compel executive branch witnesses? I think she's going to rule that McGahn has to testify. The judge in the Kupperman case did note, however, that the Bolton issue, he said, if John Bolton may become part of this case, he said, I think it raises the exact same issue as Kupperman. So we could see sort of a twofer over there.
There's a high likelihood he will. We should read a quote from the District Judge Jackson directly related to this. It said, quote, "We don't live in a world where your status as a former executive branch official somehow shields you or prevents you from giving information." I mean, Bianna, this goes to the heart of the issue of sort of absolute immunity they seem to be arguing, which one might say they're also sort of making up.
Well, making up and buying time with, right? Yes. Which is, even if at warp speed, we're talking about December 10th. For the American public, that seems like light ages from now, right? Yeah. So you talk about what we're going to hear next week, and I think the bar for hearing John Bolton is very low right now. I think we're probably not going to hear from him for that very reason. He could have said, listen, if you subpoena me, I will show up, like so many of the other witnesses did. He did not. He let the groundwork put on the table a record of his objecting to what he saw transpire, which is why he told many of those who had testified to go to White House counsel, right? There is a record of where he stood, and he has not spoken out through many of his sources that we know he has in the media about what we have heard through this testimony, which is that he objected to Rudy Giuliani's role throughout all of this, so that he wasn't going to be part of this drug deal. That it's clear that he wanted out there and he hasn't objected to it. The question is, will we hear from him going forward?
Okay, now let's talk about this news item, courtesy of our friend Maggie Haberman. President Trump and First Lady Melania are apparently moving. They are leaving New York, which has been their primary residence. They have filed the paperwork, LA, to move to Florida and I guess live at Mar-a-Lago? Is that the deal?
Yeah, I mean, you know, as many New Yorkers often do at a certain stage of life.
Snowbirds. So that, I guess, makes sense for tax purposes?
It could be for tax purposes. It could be, look, the local authorities here have been giving him a hard time. I mean, not that you escape the reach of the DA or the AG by moving to Florida. If only it was that easy. But they're going after him hard, right? Cy Vance is subpoenaing his tax records and is investigating the Trump Organization. The New York AG essentially ran on a platform of, I'm going to get this guy.
And the mayor and governor haven't been, let's say, fans.
Well, what did the governor say? He's yours, Florida?
The mayor said, don't let the door hit you on the...
Fair, here, we got it right here. Good riddance. It's not like Mr. Trump paid taxes here anyway. He's all yours, Florida. That's New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. But, okay, you know, in his statement, President Trump really kind of played the victim card about this. But, Bianna, is this about being harassed by local officials? Is this about taxes? Is this about re-election politics? Florida swing state, because this is unprecedented for a president to switch his residence.
Well, what isn't unprecedented about the president and the situation we're in now? And it could very well be all three, right? We know how he is viewed here in New York by the majority of New Yorkers. And he spends the majority of his time in Florida to begin with. So from a tax purpose standpoint, from an appeal standpoint, from a popularity standpoint,
and
it would make more sense.
It's actually
That's right.
Yes. But he also said he's going to spend the next 5 years at the White House, his favorite residence.
That's right. Well, hey, President Trump, Florida man. Okay, another new fire breaking out over...
It's been a historic week in Washington. The House of Representatives moving forward with public impeachment hearings against President Trump. How is all of this playing, and how's it going to play for the election? Joining us now is Michael Smerconish, host of CNN's Smerconish. So, Michael, we've just gotten this new poll numbers out, and it shows the country is completely divided. This is an ABC News Washington Post poll. 49% of Americans say yes, should President Trump be impeached and removed from office. 47% say no. I mean, that is just, you know, a complete divide. And if you look at the battleground states, as you know, they are much more against impeachment than the national poll. And so what does that tell you about Nancy Pelosi's motives? I mean, clearly this is not a politically astute move.
Reflect the president's approval rating, and that's been relatively consistent throughout the course of this process. If I'm Republican strategists in the Senate, if I'm Mitch McConnell, if I'm the White House, and I look at the battleground data, I want to push this into 2020. I want to have this playing itself out against the backdrop of Americans voting in the Iowa caucus and the New Hampshire primary, because I think it strengthens my argument that the resolution of this should be at the ballot box.
So, Michael, President Trump famously said he doesn't want or need swing voters in this election. That generally flies in the face of reality. One deep dive into this brand new poll as a fellow independent, you'll be interested. Among independents, the top line is actually reversed. 47% say they support, 49% currently oppose. The president has an opening here, and his opening campaign ad during the World Series seemed to double down on trying to appeal to those swing voters. This was really a good ad. Democrats have acknowledged that. What was your take?
It reminded me of a defense lawyer who in a criminal trial says, hey, I don't like my client either. You don't have to like my client, but just know that he didn't commit the crime. That's what I thought of. And John, my second reaction is, wow, that they're able to spend this amount of money this early on when, by way of comparison, Joe Biden, I think at last report, had $9 million in cash on hand. So it really spoke to the power of incumbency, of not having to face primary challenges at a time when the Democrats are all, of course, locked in a battle against one another.
Oh, President Trump's campaign is flush with cash.
Right.
I mean, flush with cash. While the Democrats are dividing the pie, into so many people, the president, his campaign can do whatever they want. So here's a little piece of that campaign ad to show everyone.
The Democrats would rather focus on impeachment and phony investigations, ignoring the real issues. But that's not stopping Donald Trump. He's no Mr. Nice Guy, but sometimes it takes a Donald Trump to change Washington.
Yeah.
Mr. Nice Guy.
And he doesn't have to be, because, if you show that he's busy getting al-Baghdadi while they're busy, at the podium sort of arguing this, I mean, those are effective optics.
Yeah, I think that he's going to replace the Rolling Stones with Alice Cooper's No More Mr. Nice Guy from circa, I don't know, 1973 or 4 at the next rally.
I appreciate the Alice Cooper reference early in the morning. Day after Halloween, I think it's appropriate.
But I mean, Michael, I think that what you often hear pundits say is that, well, when this impeachment process moves to the public phase, then you'll see the public polling change. But I don't know that to be true, because much of this has been public. I mean, we talk every day about the opening statements. We read what, comes out of some of these closed-door hearings. And so what do you think?
I think you made an excellent point earlier in the program today in noting the way the vote fell along partisan lines. 2 Democrats stepped out, 0 Republicans. John Avlon pointed out you've got all of these impending retirements, and still that didn't give any Republicans the courage to do what perhaps some thought was necessary. So it looks like, regardless, Allison, of what comes out in these public hearings, members of Congress are going to be completely lockstep with their parties.
But, Michael, just final point. I mean, what does that say about our ability to reason together? The official White House statement basically says the president has done nothing wrong. This is an illegal impeachment proceeding that's somehow unconstitutional. Does it mean that Republicans aren't willing to listen to facts? Does it mean we can't have a conversation about the facts?
John, I don't think that this is a battle of what went on here. It's a completely consistent story, and the testimony yesterday was just further confirmation. It's now an issue of, what are we going to do about it? And to Democrats, it's an impeachable offense. I found interesting Senator Pat Toomey's comments yesterday where he acknowledged wrongdoing by the president and essentially said, okay, but the bar for impeachment is really high, and this doesn't match that level.
Michael Smerconish, thank you very much for your take, as always, and be sure to watch Smerconish tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Eastern.
All right, the humanitarian... All right, President Trump insists things are better along the U.S. border with Mexico, but in reality, the humanitarian crisis is getting significantly worse. A short walk from the border into Mexico, and scores of asylum-seeking migrants living in quickly deteriorating conditions while they wait for the U.S. immigration cases. CNN's Nick Valencia got a first-hand look at conditions in one makeshift tent camp.
In this migrant camp in Matamoros, Mexico, the suffering is everywhere. Angela, the mother of this sick 2-year-old, says that 2 months ago, they crossed into the United States seeking asylum. After 3 days in U.S. custody, they were put on a bus and driven into Mexico. It's part of the Trump administration's migrant protection protocols, a policy which now requires migrants like her to remain in Mexico for their asylum cases to be called on if they cross illegally or without proper documentation. More than 55,000 people are now scattered in camps all throughout the U.S.-Mexico border.
She says she's really worried about her kids. They're not getting enough water. They're not living a very healthy life right now.
The camps are overseen by the Mexican government, which is publicly committed to protecting the migrants. But their asylum proceedings, and in many ways their fate, is entirely controlled by the United States.
What we have seen, which is consistent with my experience, as we have seen time and time again, that when individuals cannot come into this country illegally and be released from detention, the numbers of those individuals that try to come to this country decrease.
This is as a result of U.S. policy.
Yes. This entire encampment, these conditions, these deaths, these drownings, all of it is a result of U.S. policy.
ACLU of Texas staff attorney Rochelle Garza says the migrants are being denied due process. She says their fate is being decided in an unprecedented way in makeshift tent courts. The policy is being challenged in court, but for now is being allowed to proceed. The Department of Homeland Security has credited the program with slowing the flow of migrants at the border.
You hear the president say that things have gotten better on the border, and then we walk through scenes like this.
It's gotten better because they feel like they've gotten rid of the problem.
It's just sort of shoving it 5 feet from our border.
Out of sight, out of mind, and it's right at our doorstep of the United States. And this is entirely our fault. This whole thing, how these people are living.
This is what life has come to for 42-year-old Avelina Mejia. Like most mornings for the last 3 months, the Honduran migrant can be found here on the banks of the Rio Grande, washing her clothes in the same filthy and contaminated water that others are now using to bathe.
She says she knows that the water is dirty, but they themselves can't be dirty. They need to still keep some dignity.
But migrants here told us it's hard to keep their dignity when you're forced into a situation like this, a place where the camp grows every day and the few resources available are used up. Today, one of the biggest problems, there were only a handful of bathrooms for the more than 2,000 migrants who call this camp home.
What can't be translated on camera is the smell. There's not enough bathrooms for all the migrants that are here. And all around us in this encampment, like here, toilet paper, human feces everywhere.
For some, like this couple told us, life is worse here than in their home country of Guatemala.
So you're with your wife and your 3-year-old and you were all kidnapped together.
They don't want their faces seen because they say they were recently kidnapped and extorted by suspected cartels while living in Mexico.
And Fernando de Que, he said he's thinking about going back because it's been a lot of time spent here and they're getting sick.
Going back to a country they fled because of violence, only for it to follow them. Now living in questionable conditions, they're scared for their lives.
What is your worst fear at this point?
I fear for every single human being that I've talked to. I fear for their lives.
You fear that they won't be able to make it out of here alive?
Yes.
Nick Valencia, CNN, Matamoros, Mexico.
We should note that CNN has received a statement from U.S. Customs and Border Protection in response to Nick's reporting. And it says in part, Customs and Border Patrol has enrolled more than 55,000 people in the MPP, Migrant Protection Protocols, returning many to Mexico to await their immigration hearings. Mexico is providing humanitarian protections and even work authorizations to these individuals during their stay.
All right, thank you for that reporting. Meanwhile, Facebook is under fire for its policy not to fact-check political ads. Now, a CNN investigation raises new concerns that the social media giant is soft on bullies who abuse others online with hateful and violent rhetoric. CNN senior medical correspondent Elizabeth Cohen spent 6 months investigating this. So, Elizabeth, tell us your findings.
Allison, what Facebook says is that they don't tolerate bullying, but what we found is that there is a lot of bullying, and some of it is very, very disturbing. I want to introduce you to Aisha Odom. Aisha's brother has immune issues, and so she goes onto Facebook and she advocates for people to get vaccinated so that people like her brother will be protected. She opened up her Facebook Messenger, that's the private messenger, direct messenger service on Facebook one day in April, to find this message. I want to show it to you. It says, it calls her the N-word. It calls her an obscene word. It says, kill yourself, kill your kids, kill your parents. That black box there, those are graphic instructions on how to slit your wrists. She was, as you can imagine, very, very upset about this. She reported it to Facebook, and what they did was that woman who wrote her that message, she was not allowed on Messenger for 30 days. That was it. She could do anything else she wanted on Facebook, but she couldn't send private messages for 30 days. And when CNN, when we sent it to them and said, really, that's all you did? Then they took that woman off the platform. But it took us to get involved for that woman to be kicked off the platform. And this was not her first offense. She had done other things like this before. So we asked Facebook about this, and they gave us this statement. So I'm going to read this to you now. Facebook says that we want members of our community to feel safe and respected on Facebook, and will remove material that appears to purposefully target private individuals with the intention of degrading or shaming them. We try to empower our users with controls, such as blocking other users and moderating comments, so they can limit their exposure to unwanted, offensive, or hurtful content. We also encourage people to report bullying behavior on our platform, so we can learn to review the content and take proper action. And that's according to a Facebook spokeswoman person.
Elizabeth, I mean, they say they want people to report them, but they knew about this message because it was reported to them. So what about the ones that aren't reported?
You know, the people that we talk to where their messages aren't reported, and we unfortunately have dozens of horrific messages using all sorts of obscene language that we can't even talk about on television, and nothing was done. Those people, as far as we know, as far as Facebook has told us, nothing happened to those people because Facebook didn't know about it. Facebook really emphasizes people need to report this content to us. But I was talking to people, for example, mothers who lost their children. Their children died of vaccine-preventable diseases. So they went on Facebook to encourage vaccination and got these horrible messages. And they said, we got thousands of them. There was no way we could possibly report them, not to mention the fact that we were mourning the loss of a child. So they do go unreported, and Facebook puts the onus on people to report them. They, by their own admission, are not very good at proactively finding these types of horrible messages.
I mean, what are they good at, Elizabeth? And the reason I say that is because they talk the talk of they want to do the right thing, you know, they're trying to do the right thing for democracy, but then when it comes to action, they just fall down. And I don't know, I can't tell if it's lack of manpower or lack of caring or why.
You know, Allison, I've talked to several people who say exactly what you say. I mean, these are people who study social media, and they say, we don't get it. Why can't Facebook do more? And Facebook says, look, some people will call each other the N-word or other terrible names in jest. So we don't want to punish someone if they're just using a certain word or the B word kind of in jest to each other as true friends. So how are we supposed to detect it? You know, I talked to some folks who specialize in these kind of algorithms, and they're like, wait a second, they should be able to do this. There are ways to detect when this language is being used in an offensive, hurtful way. For example, to go back to that message that I showed you earlier, you call someone the N-word, you say slit your wrist, kill yourself, kill your parents, kill your children, and you give graphic instructions on how to slit your wrists, and you can't find that? Some people really find that hard to believe.
Yeah, it is. Elizabeth, thank you very much for bringing us the findings of